Xenophanes, a Greek theologian and philosopher who lived around 500 BCE, said, "In my opinion, mortals have created their gods with the dress and voice and appearance of mortals. If cattle and horses or lions had hands, or were able to draw with their feet, and produce the works which men do, horses would draw the forms of gods like horses, and cattle like cattle, and they would make their gods' bodies the same shape as their own. The Ethiopians say that their gods have snub noses and black skins, while the Thracians say that theirs have blue eyes and red hair." Hello, I'm Chris Meyer. Welcome to Session 9 of Are We Being Deceived? Searching for Truth in Religion. At this point, we've concluded, based on observation, reason, and logic, that it's more logical for the first cause to have been a living, intelligent, creative entity than any other option available to us at this point in time. In the last session, we concluded that it's more reasonable and logical that the origin of life and evolution is the result of this intelligent and creative entity. We simply call this entity the Creator. But who is this Creator, or what is this Creator? In an earlier session, we mentioned that God was in our imagination, but was not imaginary. And even though mankind was in awe of the sun and worshipped it, how did this become a God with supernatural power? We know that the concept of God or gods has been around for thousands of years, from a time when the human mind was very primitive. An important question to consider is, how could a primitive person that had never been exposed to the concept of a supernatural being come up with such a concept? René Descartes, a French philosopher, scientist, and mathematician, made a similar observation. He said, "For although the idea of substance is in me by virtue of the fact that I am a substance, that fact is not sufficient to explain my having the idea of an infinite substance, since I am finite, unless this idea proceeded from some substance which really was infinite." In other words, if everything around me is finite, that is, does not live forever, and if I don't know of anything that's infinite and I myself am finite, then how can I conceive of something that is infinite unless something that is infinite is the source of that knowledge? Likewise, how can something that is not supernatural conceive of the supernatural unless it has been planted in the mind by the supernatural? The implication is that the Creator planted this concept in the mind of mankind. Is this hard to believe? Not really. We still don't know where intuition and instinct come from. Perhaps they too are Creator implants. Since the moment mankind first conceived the idea of gods, it seems they began to attempt to make gods human. If you read some of the early mythologies of the various civilizations, you'll understand exactly what I mean. They tell story of gods making war with other gods, having sexual relations, and cheating on their spouses, activities that are common to humans. We still try to make God human today. The Bible and Koran talk about the hand, the arm, and the eyes of God. Perhaps these are used metaphorically, but the implication is that God possesses the physical attributes of humans. On the dollar bill is depicted the all-seeing eye, which represents the eye of God, or providence. The Latin written above the pyramid, annuit conceptus, means God has favored our undertaking. So even today, we're trying to make God human. Of course, this makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Since we cannot conceive of something that is inconceivable, in our need to understand what is not understandable, we attempt to make it familiar so we can understand it. However, this does a great injustice to the Creator because it implies that God is in some ways limited. If God is physical in any way, then God is limited to the things that limit the physical. We give God a name, Jehovah, Yahweh, Allah, Brahman, God, because that's what we do to things here on earth. It makes them more familiar. But again, that brings God down to a level of physical things. We've already discussed the character attributes attributed to God in the Bible and the Koran, things like loving, angry, jealous, kind, compassionate, vindictive. All are emotions experienced by humans. But does God possess those same emotions? Many of the great thinkers in history argued that we should not speak of God at all, because anything that we say about him would be inaccurate, since we can know nothing about this God who is above all that is human and worldly. In fact, it's even impractical to say that God exists, in that he is above what we understand to be existence. So what can we know? Here's another dilemma. On one hand, God is beyond our understanding. But on the other, we must have some understanding of God if God is to be a part of our lives. If God created us and has knowledge of us, then certainly God would know that we would need to know something about him, or there would be no practical reason for knowing that he exists at all. So maybe God anticipated this dilemma and made a way that we can know something about him, as much as we can know given our limited ability to know about such things. First of all, just the fact that God is not of this world or of the dimension in which we live gives us a basic understanding of what God is not. For instance, if God is not physical, then God does not possess any of the attributes of humans, nor is limited by any of the forces that limit humans and other matter. That means that God has no appearance. God is not limited by linear time. In fact, God has no gender. Gender is a physical thing. It exists for the purpose of reproduction. There's no other reason for it. If God can create something out of nothing, it doesn't make sense that God would be gender specific. So even calling God a he is misrepresenting this one and limits God to the limitations of the male gender. It's another way of attempting to make God human. So these are a few of the things that we can know about this inconceivable entity. But maybe there's more that we can know. We'll discuss that in our next session. I'd like to close this session with one of my favorite scriptures. It's found in the sacred book of John in the Nag Hammadi scriptures that were discovered near the caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. It's a little long, but it's worth reading. The One is a sovereign that has nothing over it. It is God and parent, Father of the all, the invisible one that is over the all, that is incorruptible, that is pure light at which no eye can gaze. The One is illimitable, since there is nothing before it to limit it, unfathomable, since there is nothing before it to fathom it, immeasurable, since there was nothing before it to measure it, invisible, since nothing has seen it, eternal, since it exists eternally, unutterable, since nothing could comprehend it to utter it, unnameable, since there is nothing before it to give it a name. The One is immeasurable light, pure, holy, immaculate. It is unutterable and is perfect in incorruptibility. Not that it is just perfection or blessedness or divinity. It is much greater. The One is not corporeal and it is not uncorporeal. The One is not large and it is not small. It is impossible to say, how much is it? What kind is it? For no one can understand it. The One is not among the things that exist, but it is much greater. Not that it is greater, rather as it is in itself, it is not a part of the eons of time. For whatever is part of a realm was once prepared by another. Time was not allocated to it, since it receives nothing from anyone. What would be received would be on loan. The one who is first does not need to receive anything from another. It beholds itself in its light. The One is majestic and has immeasurable purity. The One is a realm that gives a realm, life that gives life, a blessed one that gives blessedness, knowledge that gives knowledge, a good one that gives goodness, mercy that gives mercy, and redemption, grace that gives grace. Not that the One possesses this, rather the One gives immeasurable and incomprehensible light. What shall I tell you about it? Its eternal realm is incorruptible, at peace, dwelling in silence, at rest, before everything. It is the head of all realms, and it is the One who sustains them through its goodness. If you'd like to get a little more detail in what we're talking about, I'll tell you again, you can get my book, Are We Being Deceived? It's available at Amazon.com. in paperback or in ebook, or you can order it through your local bookstore. I hope to see you for the next session.